Imagine the most feared war horse in the kingdom, trained to crush men beneath iron hooves, a creature that bowed to no command but one, suddenly lowering itself before a nameless maid in the middle of a war council, silencing generals, shattering pride, and forcing a ruthless duke to question everything he believed about power. What kind of girl could make a beast of war kneel, and what would it cost her once the men in that room decided they could not afford to let her exist? The war room of Blackthorn Keep was never meant for softness, not for mercy, and certainly not for miracles. It was a place where decisions were carved like wounds into maps, where men spoke in terms of sacrifice and victory, as if they had never been the same thing. And at the center of it all stood Duke Alaric Vane, a man whose name carried the weight of battlefields long before he entered them, whose reputation moved ahead of him like a storm that never broke, only gathered, cold and inevitable. And beside him, as always, was the creature they feared almost as much as they feared him, a towering warhorse known simply as Ruin, a beast bred for violence and hardened by it, its dark coat marked with scars that told stories no one dared ask about, its breath heavy and sharp in the chill air, its hooves restless against stone, as if even standing still was a kind of restraint it resented. They said Ruin had trampled men who begged for mercy, that it had bitten through leather and bone alike, that it could sense weakness the way wolves sensed blood, and whether those stories were true hardly mattered, because no one in that room was willing to test them, not unless they were certain they would survive the answer, and survival was never guaranteed where the Duke was concerned. The council had been tense long before the interruption, voices tight with disagreement as generals argued over supply lines and strategies, each man certain of his own brilliance, and equally certain that the others were fools, their words cutting sharper with every exchange, pride swelling in the space where caution should have lived. And through it all, the Duke remained silent, his gaze fixed on the map before him, not ignoring them, but measuring, weighing, deciding which of them would be useful and which would be discarded when the time came. Because men were tools in war, no different from blades, and he had never been sentimental about tools. The fire burned low, casting long shadows that made the room feel narrower than it was, and somewhere in the corner, Ruin shifted, its ears flicking back at the rising tension, its muscles tightening as if the air itself had begun to grate against it. But no one paid that enough attention, because men who believed themselves powerful often forgot that danger did not always announce itself with a warning. She entered quietly, the way servants always did, carrying a tray of water that no one had asked for, but everyone expected, because that was her place, to anticipate, to provide, to disappear. Elin had long ago learned how to move without being noticed, how to keep her eyes lowered just enough to avoid offense without appearing weak, how to exist in rooms that were never meant to acknowledge her. And yet there was something about her stillness that resisted being erased, something in the way she held herself that suggested she was choosing silence rather than being shaped by it. And if anyone had truly looked at her, they might have seen it, but no one did, because no one thought to look, not at someone like her. The argument reached its peak just as she stepped closer to the table, a general slamming his hand down hard enough to rattle the ink pots, his voice rising in frustration as he accused another of cowardice. And that was when it happened. Not the miracle, not yet, but the beginning of it, the moment where control slipped just enough to let chaos breathe. Ruin's head snapped up, ears flattening, nostrils flaring as the sharp movement and louder voices struck something primal in it, something that had been trained for battle, not for crowded rooms filled with tension disguised as civility. And the chain that held it gave a harsh metallic scrape as the beast shifted, one heavy hoof striking the stone with a force that echoed through the chamber like a warning. But still, they ignored it, or pretended to, because to acknowledge it would mean admitting they were no longer in control. The second movement came faster, harsher, a violent toss of the head, a surge against restraint, leather creaking under strain as the handlers at the edge of the room stiffened, their hands tightening instinctively. Their expressions carefully blank, but their fear unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read it. And then the chain snapped taut with a crack that cut through the argument like a blade, silencing the room not out of discipline, but out of instinct, because suddenly every man there remembered that they were flesh, not strategy, and flesh could be broken. A chair scraped back, Someone cursed under their breath. Another man took a step away without realizing it, and Ruin reared, towering, furious, its front hooves striking the air as if it were already trampling an enemy. And in that moment, there was no duke, no generals, no war plan. Only a beast deciding what to destroy first. Orders came too late, shouted commands layered over each other, none of them strong enough to matter, because control, once lost, rarely returned on demand, and the handlers hesitated for just a fraction too long. The kind of hesitation that gets men killed, and the beast lunged forward, dragging them with it, its eyes wild, its breath a harsh, explosive sound that filled the room with the promise of violence. And that was when Elin moved. Not quickly, not dramatically, but with a certainty that did not belong in a servant, stepping away from the safety of the wall and into the path of something that could crush her without effort. Someone shouted at her to stop. Another voice called her a fool, but she did not listen, because fear had its place, and this was not it. She set the tray down without looking, the soft clink of glass absurdly gentle against the rising chaos, and lifted her gaze fully for the first time, meeting the eyes of the beast as if it were not a weapon, not a monster, but something that could understand her, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to narrow to that single line of sight, everything else fading into background noise, the shouts, the movement, the fear, and when she spoke, her voice was not loud, not commanding, not shaped by authority or training, but by something far more dangerous, honesty. Enough. The word did not echo, did not demand, and yet it cut through the chaos with a clarity that made the next moment feel unreal, because Ruin stopped. Not completely, not at once, but enough for the shift to be undeniable, its forward momentum faltering as if it had struck something invisible, its head lowering just slightly, confusion threading through its fury, and Elin took another step closer, steady, unhurried, as if she were approaching a skittish animal in a quiet field rather than a war beast in a room full of men who suddenly did not know where to stand. The handlers froze, uncertain. The generals held their breath without realizing it. And even the duke, who had not moved since the chaos began, lifted his gaze from the map to watch, truly watch, as something unfolded that did not fit into any strategy he had ever known. The beast's nostrils flared, its chest heaving as it stared at her, searching, testing, and then, slowly, impossibly, it bent, one front leg folding, then the other, its massive body lowering with a heavy, deliberate motion until one knee touched the cold stone floor, the sound dull and final like a verdict being delivered, and the silence that followed was absolute, the kind that erased everything that came before it, the kind that made men forget how to speak, because nothing in their world had prepared them for this. Ruin, the Duke's war horse, the creature that answered only to power, knelt before a Maid who had none, and in that moment, the balance of the room shifted in a way none of them yet understood, but all of them would soon fear. They had witnessed slaughter, betrayal, and the collapse of entire armies, but nothing unsettled them like the sight of a warred beast kneeling before a servant, and as the silence stretched across the Duke's war room, it began to change shape, hardening into something far more dangerous than shock. It became doubt. A trick, one general said too quickly, his voice cutting through the stillness as if he could force reality back into place, and another gave a brittle laugh, nodding as though agreement could make it true. But no one stepped forward, no one dared test the claim, because Ruin still stood there, massive and unmoving, its attention fixed not on the men who commanded armies, but on the girl who commanded nothing at all. Elin did not react to them. She did not lower her gaze or shrink beneath their scrutiny, nor did she seek approval. She simply existed in the center of their disbelief with a calm that unsettled them more than defiance ever could, because defiance could be punished, but this quiet certainty had no obvious weakness. The Duke stepped forward at last, his presence pulling the room back into fragile order, and when he spoke, his voice was low, controlled. Stand. The command was for the horse, and Ruin obeyed immediately, rising with restrained power, yet it did not return to its former agitation. Instead, it lingered, watchful, its focus drifting back to Elin in a way that made several men shift uneasily. That was when suspicion took hold. Do it again, a voice demanded, sharper now, more insistent, because they needed proof that this moment could be repeated or broken. Elin's eyes flickered briefly toward them, then back to the beast. "You're unsettling him," she said quietly, and a few men scoffed at that, offended by the implication that they, not the creature, were the source of danger. "Then show us," the same voice pressed. The room complied in subtle cruelty, boots scraping too loudly, a sudden laugh cracking the air, a deliberate step too close, and Ruin reacted instantly, its body tightening, its head jerking as tension surged back through it like fire catching dry wood. The handlers stiffened, gripping the chain as the beast stamped hard against the stone, the sharp echo snapping through the chamber, and a ripple of anticipation spread among the men. Not fear this time, but hunger, because now they expected her to fail. But Elin did not retreat. She stepped forward instead, steady and unhurried, her gaze lifting to meet the animal's fury head-on, and when she spoke again, her voice did not rise to meet the chaos. It cut through it. "Enough." The word landed clean and unshaken, and the effect was immediate. Ruin's movement faltered, its aggression breaking just enough to fracture the moment, and as the room held its breath, something even more unsettling followed. The beast turned, not toward her, but toward the man, its body angling as if placing itself between them and her, a silent, instinctive barrier. That was when the truth settled over the room like a blade. This was not obedience. This was choice. And across the space, the Duke understood it before anyone else, his silence sharpening into something dangerous, because power he could command, but loyalty freely given was something else entirely, and every man in that room knew it meant the balance had shifted in a way none of them could control. Power does not forgive what it cannot control, and by the time the war room found its voice again, the decision had already begun to form, not spoken, not agreed upon, but understood in the glances, shared between men who had built their lives on dominance. The girl had to be diminished, explained, or removed. "She cannot remain," one advisor said carefully, as if choosing softer words might hide the intent beneath them. But the Duke did not respond at once, his gaze fixed instead on the quiet space where Elin stood beside the war horse, the two of them bound by something no command had forged, something no title could claim. Ruin shifted once, then stilled again, its presence a warning that needed no translation, and for the first time, the men in that room understood that whatever had happened could not simply be undone. "You've made this complicated," another voice added, thinner now, less certain, and that was when the Duke finally turned, his expression carved back into its usual cold precision, though something in it had sharpened into finality. "No," he said quietly. "It was always complicated. You simply never noticed." The words landed without force, yet no one challenged them, because beneath them lay a truth they did not want to face, that power had just slipped beyond their reach, and it had chosen its own direction. Elin met the Duke's gaze without bowing, without gratitude, as if she understood the cost already forming around her, and when she spoke, her voice was steady. "If you protect me, they'll turn it into something else. A weapon, a scandal, a reason." The Duke held her gaze for a moment longer, then gave the smallest nod, not in agreement, but an acknowledgement. "They already have," he replied. Outside, beyond the stone walls, the sounds of war carried faintly on the wind, distant yet inevitable, a reminder that battles were rarely confined to fields and blades. They lived in whispers, in reputations, in the quiet decisions that shaped who would rise and who would fall. Behind him, the general said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. Whatever authority they believed they held had just been challenged by something far simpler and far more dangerous than strategy. And as Ruin stepped closer to Elin without being called, the truth settled into the room like a final verdict. The war ahead would not be fought with armies alone, and at its center would stand a girl who did not bow, and a beast that had chosen her instead.